to this episode again, Random Life, that I want to continue a little the topic of unnecessary suffering and how to reduce it. And one of the amazing tool that we can use to reduce that unnecessary suffering is actually taking responsibility for our way of behaving, the way we are showing up, the way we're feeling, the way we're thinking, the way we're believing, taking responsibility for all of them. Now, I have noticed that throughout coaching so many amazing humanitarian clients and myself, obviously, I have noticed one thing that we are not always sure where we take responsibility and where we don't, or we like have this murky boundaries of where it's our responsibility and where it's not our responsibility. And therefore I thought of giving you some ways you can recognize for yourself how do you know that boundary, right? How do you know that subtle ways where you are taking responsibility where you shouldn't be, or we're actually not taking responsibility where actually you should be, and notice for yourself how you're doing it. So that's why I wanted to do this short, random live about taking responsibility. So obviously, I could be talking about also not taking responsibility altogether, and I thought that that's so obvious, so like of course, everyone probably knows this by now. So that's why I am not really talking about that. So if you have any questions about not taking responsibility, of course, you can let me know and I can cover another topic. So the way I see it, beside the taking no responsibility, right? Excuse me. The way I see it, that we have three ways to take responsibility. One is we're taking too much responsibility where we shouldn't be. Two, we're not taking enough responsibility where we should be. And third is we're taking full responsibility, but only for certain things. And that's what I'm going to cover. And of course, also tell you how you will recognize which one is which, and when you're doing too little or too much, obviously that leads you to suffering in one way or another, or you feeling powerless, which we do not want to have. And therefore, I encourage you to transition to the taking full responsibility category. And of course, I invite you to coach with me on this so we can get you to that taking full responsibility person if you're not there yet. So let's start with the first one, right? The first one of taking too much responsibility. And how do we know when we're taking too much responsibility? Is one of the indicators that you can know is when you feel like you are better than someone else, not in terms of the work that you're doing, but just like as a person feeling like, oh, I'm better than them. Or another way you can recognize is when you see that you are telling yourself that they can't handle this, or they can't really make this work, or they can't really do this work. So therefore you take over doing it. Or even if you delegate it for some time, but then you don't really wait for them, or even if you do, then you redo the whole thing, believing that their way of doing is absolutely not a go area, and therefore you just redo it yourself, right? Or you're also do like allowing them or delegating to them, and then you're not really teaching them in the way that they can learn from this experience and grow. So therefore you keep prioritizing your deadlines and what needs to be done now, instead of thinking about how delegating to them would benefit them and how it can grow them, and how in the future they will be your asset to help you get to where you want to go. And therefore, this all comes from this feeling of, oh, I know better, or I'm better than them. Even though in some of the experience, we of course might be better because of our experience, because of things that we have gone through, right? But the way that it will feel is like you wanting to undermine their capacity and overmining, or I don't know what's the other word, right? Like emphasizing on how you are so good at this, or how you are better than this. So it will become all about you or your deadlines, instead of um, assisting the person, or the assisting the supervisee or the colleague to learn for themselves, so they can also grow in their own path of getting to where they want to go, right? So that's why too much responsibility, one of the ways you can recognize is when you feel like you are better than them, or you are undermining their ability because you are not really patient for actually waiting for them to finish it, or like trusting them they will do the good job, or even if they did the job but in a different way, but you still didn't like it because it's not your way, right? Then this is where you can start looking at how you're taking too much responsibility, meaning that's actually leading to suffering. And the way it leads to suffering is by you feeling frustrated that they didn't do a good job, or you knew they wouldn't do the good job anyway. Why do this, right? You will be suffering from all of this. And of course, they will be suffering from this by not being valued for what they do, or not really being understood or heard, or not really learning and growing, and therefore feeling like that just you doing a useless work when they collaborate with you, right? So that is one of the ways that you really can recognize and decide if that's how you want to be a colleague or a manager or a person in that organization, or maybe in a like relationship with your loved ones as well, right? So that's one of the big ways you can recognize it, not to take those type of responsibility where it's actually harmful. The other way that you can also recognize that you're doing like taking too much responsibility is feeling like you cannot hurt them, right? You can't hurt them. And if you say something, if you're really honest with yourself, or if you're really honest in that conversation, you will disappoint them or you will hurt them, and therefore you don't say, and then therefore you keep like disappointing yourself, or not being honest with yourself, or just keep being like a condescending, or excuse me, another word of like, oh, they are not capable of understanding my very sophisticated reasoning or whatever, right? So in other words, you don't treat them equally, or you don't think that they have their agency and you have your agency, and they can handle being in an honest relationship where they also hear what you really have to say, and you also create the space where they can tell you those things in an honest way, right? So this is actually another way of not treating them equal, treating them a little bit like below, or treating like they can't handle those emotions, right? So in other words, you're taking responsibility for their emotions, of how they will feel if you act XYZ way. And therefore, in order to save them from feeling that way, in quotes, right? um, we become into this like savior role, or the role of the patronizing, I think is another word, right? Role of, okay, therefore I can't be honest, I can't be me, and therefore I just need to keep like having the superficial level of conversation, or not really being honest and building that conversation. That's how you will know that you're taking responsibility that is harmful for them, because you are now deciding how they could feel, even though they probably feel a totally different way, but you're assuming this is how they feel, and you can't allow them to feel that way, or you can't make them feel that way. And therefore, again, you're causing that suffering for yourself by not being honest with yourself and with the other person, right? In other words, lying to them and lying to yourself, and also them feeling like they can't really have that kind of open, honest conversations because there's no space for it, or feeling afraid to hurt your feeling maybe as well, because you project your you project to them saying that, well, you can handle and you can be hurt, and then they may be projecting that to you as well, right? So therefore both of them are suffering, or both of them are getting um, a negative outcome out of this conversation or out of this relationship. That's when too much responsibility actually hurts you and the other person. Now let me have a look at my notes, because yes, I think I got that. So now let's look at the not taking responsibility, or in other words, not taking enough responsibility. Exactly. right? Not taking enough responsibility, or in other words, too little responsibility, and how that looks like. And how do you recognize that is how it's looking like? So, another way, really, the way that you can look at it, the switch, the other too much responsibility, in this case, switching to you treating yourself less than the others, right? That's not taking enough responsibility, because you are basically telling yourself that you are not really capable of, you are not really capable of figuring out, you're not really capable of understanding why and how things happen and fixing things, or course correcting things, or troubleshooting things. You're not really capable of, or assume that's not up to you, that's not it doesn't really depend on you, and therefore you just take a responsibility to a certain level, meaning that you do a certain things. For instance, let's say that you apply for a job, right? You apply for a job, and then uh, as soon as you don't get it, you just don't sit around and analyze and finding out from this powerful place of, okay, why didn't I get the job? Like, beside explaining away to ourselves, oh, because this job was created for a certain person or whatever, because that's usually how we stop then accessing our own wisdom to understand why else could be the reason why we didn't get the job, so that we can improve our own, increase our own awareness, increase our own understanding of what else could we have done it in different ways, so that we can get the job we really want to, right? Instead of focusing or blaming on how system is unfair and all of this. And I'm not saying that system is fair just because we don't blame them, right? It's just that I find oftentimes, if we're not really working on changing the system, just keep complaining or blaming the system is not going to increase our awareness of what else we could have done, we could have said, that could increase our chances of getting it. And that's why I'm just like showing you where you could be spending your energy and where you don't need to spend your energy if you don't want to. And oftentimes, what we end up doing after interviews, especially, is we say, oh, it's unfair. I applied so many times, how things are not going the way we want to, right? We focus so much on how we couldn't change the other people or the system, which we know we can't do that anyway. So therefore, how else can we get to the place we want to with our resources? What we could have done differently? What we could have said differently? How we could have maybe showed up differently? How we could have prepared all of this process differently? So if we focus on that, then we access all of our wisdom to making us even feel more powerful, to be course correcting and changing to getting to what we want to. And that's what taking too little responsibility looks like. Excuse me. Another way that I see that taking little responsibility is when we get into a very transactional mindset. And the way that I want to explain, excuse me, the way I want to explain to transactional mindset is we get so much into this. I have done this piece, they have to do this piece, and I have done this, and then they have to do this, and we get like so calculating in our approaches to a point that it becomes so exhausting, and to a point that as soon as they don't do their part, let's say the way that we expected, then we start suffering and keep saying, oh, how unfair it is, and how it's not right, and all of these things, instead of deciding what are we going to do about those things, right? So therefore we somehow take responsibility for those actions in that moment, but then as soon as things don't work out the way we want to, then we just give up, or we just like, I did my part, and I now have no tolerance for anything, or I don't want to figure out how to solve the problem, or I just want to focus on how unfair everything is. Instead of, okay, do I really want to keep focusing on that unfairness if I don't do anything about it? Or is that really transactional approach is the right one for me, meaning keep calculating the whole time? And of course, by this, please don't get me wrong, also say that, okay, that means that we just tolerate all of those abuse, or I'm not saying any of this at all. I'm just saying that in the moment when we recognize that relationships are built on non-transactional way of working with people, meaning that we always do the part that we really want to do, and then they do the part they want to do, and if they don't, we then decide, do we want to keep this relationship or be in this relationship or not, but not put ourselves in the position of, I can spend only this hour, they have to spend this hour, I can spend this money, they can spend this money. If they didn't, then I get the whole like relationship crisis, and that's not useful for any relationship. So transactional mindset is where we get into the calculating mode, where we then don't enjoy the actual relationship, we don't enjoy what we're doing, we don't enjoy how we're doing it, and that keeps bringing suffering as well. So that keeps bringing us to basically the way you realize when you are putting yourself in too little responsibility is when you are putting yourself in a powerless situation, or in a situation where you keep feeling like frustrations and disappointments, or keep wanting to blame others, and therefore not really getting to how to solve it and what to do with that situation, or not deciding anything about that situation. So that brings me to the third component, which is taking full responsibility for our beliefs and thoughts, for our feelings, for how we show up, and how we create the results we want to. And this is the part that I really want to invite you to come to transition in your own life, in your own mindset, because of all the ways how it makes us feel so powerful, so in charge, so freeing, for us to be then deciding what to do with whatever the situation that comes our way, instead of trying to like control the other person by saying, oh my God, how are they thinking? How are they feeling? I make sure that they feel okay. Or instead of keep making ourselves little by saying, oh, I did everything I could, but they still didn't decide on me. So I must be really not good, or the system is not good, right? So we, instead of putting ourselves in this unequal relationship with the world, we get into this full power to our highest self, of recognizing how much of the resources and how much of the tools that we have within to be solving any problem, or to be getting to whatever we want to, and always approaching any situation from that perspective, at the same time treating ourselves equal to others, and recognizing we have our own agency in what we decide, and how we act, by taking our responsibility for ourselves, and also letting others taking responsibility for themselves, and not get into their field, not get into their thoughts or into their feelings, or trying to guess or manipulate, or steer their thoughts to what we want, right? But rather letting them think and feel and show up the way they want to, and us doing the same for ourselves. So the way that you really like understand when we are in this fully taking responsibility mode, suffering becomes zero almost. It becomes so like non-existent, simply because we always feel like in charge of how else we can do to change things, to get to what we want to solve the problems the way we want to, or the to collaborate, contribute the way we think is the best way to do, and at the same time creating space for others doing the same with their own geniuses, and we bring our genius to that table. And that taking full responsibility can also look like is when we go to an interview and we didn't get it, instead of focusing on how system is unfair, or how they had already someone and da 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 da, we always focus on, okay, this I didn't get. Yes, maybe there's someone they already had in mind, but I have no way of knowing it, or even if I did know, I want to use this opportunity for me to learn how else could I have said things the way I did? How else could I have felt in that interview? What else could I have added or presented or showed? What evidences? And therefore, we get so much value out for ourselves, so much wisdom we get from ourselves that then we use it for the next experience, and we even feel like more in charge to go to do the interview without sitting in our suffering or feeling powerless that we can't do xyz or we couldn't, and therefore we're just failure or we're lost or whatever the things that we then go into pitying ourselves or being mad at the world, right? So that's why taking full responsibility is we always know that we can always be in charge of how we're thinking, how we're believing, what are the things we're believing, being aware of them, how are the ways we're feeling, how are the ways we want to feel, how we are showing up. Is that how we want to show up? And if not, how else we want to show up? And taking responsibility for all of them and owning them, making decisions around all of those things, and then going, creating the things, outcomes that we want. And if those outcomes are not what we really want, then always again taking responsibility how we want to change them, who we want to ask for help, and how we want to get to where we want to, and then focusing on that. And that will always make the suffering for us almost non-existent. And even if we are going through some tough times, we always know why we're going through and how we're doing it. And at the same time, we have so much understanding, compassion, and also capability to hold space for others, do the same in their relationship with us. And that makes our relationship so much more fulfilling and enjoyable. So, my dears, I have covered three ways of taking responsibility, which ones are leading to suffering and feeling powerless, and which ones actually to making us feel so much powerful, so much empowered, so much in charge that we always trust our decisions of what to do and how to do and where to go instead of focusing on things that we can't do anything about it. And I really invite you to transition to being the person who's fully in charge of all the things you create. And that way your life will just exponentially feel so like so amazing to live in, so um, powerful to be in and living it and moving forward. And that's what I really want you to be focusing on. So, have a coach with me, and I would love to help you get you to this place of taking full responsibility for how you're feeling, how you are acting, how you are showing up, and most importantly, how are you living your life, what results you're creating for yourself. So, have an amazing week. I will speak to you very soon.